Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're tackling questions in English conversation.
That's right. Specifically, how to ask them and how to answer them.
This guide we've got, it's packed with tips to make your conversations way more interesting and engaging. I'm already hooked, and we're just getting started.
It's funny as something we do every single day, like asking and answering questions, can have so much depth to it.
Totally. For example, I never realized how strategic you can be with even simple yes or no questions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The way you frame those seemingly basic questions can really make a difference in keeping the conversation flowing instead of it just ending right there.
Okay, so before we get into all those fancy techniques, let's make sure we're all on the same page with the grammar side of things.
Sounds good to me.
Sometimes, I'll admit, I get a little tripped up on those auxiliary verbs. You know, those helping verbs like do or is.
Mm.
They're essential for questions, right?
100%. Auxiliary verbs are the backbone of English questions. They really are. It's like they provide the structure, the scaffolding for the whole question.
Right, right. The guide gives some good examples, but basically, they're those little words that pop up before the subject.
Exactly. So instead of saying, you live in London, it becomes, do you live in London?
Hmm.
The word order is super important.
Uh-huh. Those tiny words pack a punch. So, you've got your basic structure down. Then the guide breaks down all these different types of questions. Let's start with those yes or no questions. You mentioned they're sneakier than they seem.
Oh, they definitely are. Most people just give a simple yes or no and leave it at that. But the guide suggests using these questions as a chance to say more about yourself and keep the conversation going.
Ooh, give me an example. I'm intrigued.
Okay, let's say someone asks, do you enjoy cooking? Instead of just saying no, which kind of kills the vibe, you could say, not really, but I'm a huge foodie. Have you been to that new Thai place downtown?
Ah, I see. You're taking that no and turning it into an opening to share something about yourself and even throw a question back at them.
Exactly. It's like a conversational volley, keeping things moving back and forth.
Clever.
Oh.
Okay, what about those why questions like what, where, when? Sometimes I feel like I use the same ones over and over.
It's funny you mention that because the guide actually emphasizes practicing different WA questions out loud. It helps you build confidence and sound more natural.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
I guess just knowing the words isn't enough. You've got to actually say them out loud to really get comfortable.
Exactly. So push yourself to use when, why, and how questions instead of always defaulting to what and where.
Challenge accepted. All right, what's up next in the question lineup?
Choice questions. Those are all about giving options, helping people make decisions together.
Like, do you want to grab pizza or tacos?
Exactly. But here's a little twist the guide throws in. Don't overuse those choice questions. It can actually limit the conversation.
Really? Why is that?
Well, think about it. When you give someone only two options, pizza or tacos, you're narrowing down the possibilities. Instead, try something like, what sounds good for dinner tonight?
Oh, that's so much more open-ended. It invites a much richer conversation about food preferences and what people are feeling.
Exactly. This guide is all about using questions to really get to know the other person's thoughts and feelings, you know?
Love it. Okay, what other types of questions are we exploring today?
Let's dive into tag questions. Those little additions we tack onto the end of sentences for confirmation or to seek agreement.
You mean like it's beautiful weather today, isn't it?
Perfect example. Tag questions can be really interesting because they can add this subtle layer of meaning to your sentence.
How so? I'm curious.
It's all about the intonation, the way your voice rises or falls. A rising intonation suggests uncertainty, like you're genuinely checking, but a falling intonation, it kind of implies you're pretty sure you're right and just want the other person to agree with you.
Wow, the power of intonation. It's amazing how much you can communicate with just a little shift in your voice.
I know, right? And that's what I love about mastering English questions. It's not just about getting the grammar perfect. It's about using these subtle tools to express yourself more clearly and connect with people on a deeper level.
This is already making me feel more confident just thinking about it.
I love that. But remember, confidence comes with practice. So now that we've covered the basics, let's shift gears and talk about how to answer questions with style and grace.
Ooh, I'm ready. Hit me with those tips.
Huh?
Okay, so we've talked about all these different types of questions and how to use them strategically. But what about the other side of the coin? Like, how do we answer those questions in a way that keeps the conversation flowing?
It's just as important, right? And the guide has some solid advice on that front. It starts with setting the right tone.
You mean not just saying yes or no and calling it a day?
Exactly. Even for a simple question, try starting your answer with something like, "That's a great question," or "I'm happy you asked." It just shows you're present and engaged.
Yeah, like you're acknowledging the other person and inviting them to keep chatting instead of shutting them down.
Exactly. And then instead of giving those super short one-word answers, try elaborating a bit. The guide gives this perfect example. If someone asks where you live and you just say London, it doesn't give them much to work with.
Right. It feels like you're putting up a wall and stopping the conversation from going anywhere.
Totally. But if you say something like, I live in London, it's such a vibrant city with awesome museums and parks, you're giving them more to connect with.
I like that. It's like painting a picture with your words and inviting them to explore it with you.
That's a great way to think about it. And hey, if you need a sec to collect your thoughts, no worries. The guide has got you covered. It suggests some phrases you can use to buy yourself some time.
Oh yeah, those are lifesavers. Like, let me see here. That's an interesting question. Let me think about that for a second. I use those all the time.
They're so helpful, right? Those phrases let the other person know that you're actually considering their question and putting effort into your answer.
Totally. And they help avoid those awkward silences.
Speaking of awkward silences, let's touch on those common mistakes that the guide highlights. Always good to know what to watch out for.
True. You know, one thing I mess up sometimes is the word order, especially with those auxiliary verbs.
I've been there. It's so easy to get tripped up.
Like I'll catch myself about to say something like, where you go, instead of where did you go?
It happens to everyone. But yeah, being mindful of that word order is key.
Definitely. And what about when you just completely blank on the auxiliary verb? Like, you know it should be there, but your mind goes blank.
Yeah, that's another common one. Especially when we're nervous or speaking quickly. The guide reminds us to just slow down, breathe, and make sure those helping verbs are where they belong.
They're like the glue that holds the whole question together.
Exactly. Oh, and one more thing the guide mentions. Be careful about translating directly from your native language.
Oh my gosh, I've been there. Sometimes I try to translate word for word and it just sounds weird.
Right. It's tempting, but English has its own rhythm and flow. The more you immerse yourself in the language, the more you'll start to naturally think in English instead of translating in your head.
Makes sense. So we've talked about asking questions, answering them well, and even avoiding common mistakes. Now, I'm really curious about those extra tips for sounding more natural. Like that's the next level, right?
Absolutely. That's where the real fluency magic happens. And the guide has some awesome tips for that. Are you ready?
Hit me.
Okay. First up, embrace contractions. It instantly makes your speech sound smoother and less formal.
I'm all about that.
Instead of, I'm going to the store, try, I'm going to the store. Such a small tweak, but it makes a big difference.
It's like the difference between a robot and a real person.
Haha, exactly. And speaking of sounding like a real person, don't be afraid to use those filler words.
Wait, fillers. I thought we were supposed to avoid those.
Not necessarily. Used strategically, they can actually make you sound more natural. Think, well, you know, even like,
I never thought of it that way. I've always tried to get rid of them, but I guess they do give you a moment to pause.
yeah. And the guide even gives an example. So, what are you doing this weekend? Sounds way more conversational than just blurting out, what are you doing this weekend?
So true. It's those tiny details that can make a big difference. Okay, what's the last tip for sounding super smooth?
Okay, this is my personal fave. Mirroring the other person's language.
Mirroring, like just repeating what they say word for word.
Not exactly. It's more about subtly reflecting their word choices and their style. Like, if someone says, I'm really into photography these days, you could say something like, oh, photography is so cool. What kind of camera do you use?
Ah, I see. You're using their word photography
Yeah.
and showing that you're genuinely interested in what they're saying.
Exactly. It builds that connection and helps the conversation flow. It's like you're speaking their language, both literally and figuratively.
I love that. I'm definitely going to try that.
It's super effective once you get the hang of it, like a secret weapon for building rapport. So yeah, we've covered a lot of ground today. Different types of questions, answering thoughtfully, and even those ninja tricks for sounding more natural. I'm feeling pretty good about this.
I'm pumped to put all this into practice. Before we wrap up, I'm curious, was there anything in this deep dive that really stood out to you?
You know, what really struck me was how much power we have when we speak. By choosing our words carefully, we can guide the conversation, build connections, and even, influence the other person's mood.
That's so true. It makes you realize that asking and answering questions is about way more than just exchanging information. It's about shaping the whole interaction.
Exactly. It's why I find language so fascinating. It's not just grammar rules, it's about those subtle ways we use language to connect with each other and understand the world.
I love that. Well, for our listener out there, I hope you're feeling inspired to level up your question game and have those deeper, more meaningful conversations.
Remember, language is a powerful tool, and with a bit of practice, you can use it to make a real difference.
So well said. Now, before we sign off, let's leave our listener with something to ponder. So we've spent all this time talking about asking better questions.
Right.
But what about when we're on the receiving end? How can we encourage the other person to really open up and share what they're thinking and feeling, not just give, like, surface level answers?
That's a brilliant point. It goes both ways, doesn't it? We've talked a lot about being engaging when we answer questions,
Right.
but being a good listener is just as important, if not more.
For sure. So how do we do that? How do we go beyond just nodding along and saying, uh-huh? What are some ways we can show the speaker that we're really listening and that we care about what they have to say?
Yeah, and this is something the guide doesn't get into directly,
Yeah.
but it's definitely something we can apply based on what we've learned so far.
I'm all ears.
One really powerful technique, use those questions, but not just to get basic information. Use them to really dig deeper into the speaker's perspective, to get at their thoughts and feelings.
Oh, I see what you mean. So instead of just asking, what did you do today? I could ask, what was the most exciting part of your day? Or how did that make you feel?
Exactly. Those questions show that you're not just passively listening, you're actively trying to understand their experience.
I can see how that would make the speaker feel more valued and encourage them to share more openly. What else can we do to be better listeners?
Well, mirroring. Remember how we talked about mirroring the other person's language when we speak? It's just as effective when you're listening. Try subtly reflecting back their emotions and using similar language to show that you're on the same page as them.
Okay, so for example, if someone says, I'm feeling kind of stressed about work lately, I could respond with something like, yeah, it sounds like you have a lot on your plate right now. It's understandable to feel stressed in that situation.
Perfect example. You're validating their feelings, and you're using similar language to create a sense of empathy and understanding. It really makes a difference.
And I guess those nonverbal cues are important too, right? Like making eye contact, nodding, and just offering those little verbal signals like, I see, or that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. It all adds up to creating this safe space where the other person feels comfortable opening up and sharing both the good stuff and the not so good stuff.
So it's a combination of things, asking thoughtful questions, mirroring their language and emotions, and then those nonverbal cues to show you're present.
Exactly. It's about being an active participant, even when you're the one listening. Remember, it's a dance, not a monologue.
Ooh, I love that. It really is like a dance. Okay, well, I think we've covered so much ground today. We've explored all these different aspects of questions, how to ask them, how to answer them, and even how to be a better listener. It's been amazing.
It has been a great deep dive. Now it's up to our listeners to take all this knowledge and put it into practice.
Yes. Go forth and have amazing conversations. To all our listeners out there, we hope you're leaving this deep dive feeling empowered and ready to connect with people on a deeper level.
Absolutely. And remember, language is powerful. With a little effort, you can use it to make a real difference in the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
All right, that's it for us today. We'll leave you with one final question to think about. What questions are you going to ask today to really connect with someone and make their voice heard?
Until next time, keep those questions coming.
Happy questioning, everyone.
Hey, everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to be diving deep into questions.
Questions.
Yeah, how to ask them, how to answer them in English.
Yeah.
It's something we do all the time, but
Right.
we've got this guide on how to ask and answer questions in English. And I think this is going to be super useful for anyone, whether they're prepping for a big meeting
Oh, absolutely.
or a presentation or just, want to have better conversations in English.
Just everyday conversations even.
Exactly. Yeah. So to kick things off, I'm really curious.
Sure.
We ask questions all the time, but what is it about questions that make them so important for connecting with people?
Oh, we kind of take it for granted.
Yeah.
We just throw them out there.
Yeah.
But they really are like the building blocks of connection.
Mhm.
They're not just about getting information,
Right.
I mean, think about it. You're meeting someone new.
Yeah.
What better way to break the ice
Uh-huh.
than to ask them questions and show a little bit of interest?
Absolutely. And it really shifts the focus from me talking at you to let's have a conversation, let's connect.
Right. Shows curiosity,
Yes.
engagement,
Yeah.
willingness to learn.
Yeah. And the guide really emphasizes that it kind of keeps the conversation flowing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it,
Keeps those gears turning.
yeah. And it can even spark
Yeah.
real relationships just from asking questions.
Absolutely.
So I thought it was really interesting how the guide breaks down like the structure
Yeah.
of a question, almost like a little formula.
It's true. It's like a
Not-
puzzle. Or
a mini mystery to solve.
exactly, take a simple question. Like, where do you live?
Right.
It starts with that question word, where.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Then it's followed by the auxiliary verb,
Okay.
do.
Mm-hmm.
Then the subject, which is you. And then the main verb, live.
So it's like a pattern almost that you can follow to kind of formulate your question.
Once you see the pattern, it's like, boom.
Yeah. Becomes so much easier.
Exactly.
And speaking of patterns, I love how the guide dives into different types of questions.
Absolutely.
It's like we've got this whole tasting menu.
We do.
Of questions.
Yeah.
We've got yes/no questions, what questions, choice questions, even those tricky tag questions.
Yeah, those tag questions.
Yeah. So what stands out to you about like these different types?
Well, each one kind of serves its own purpose.
Yeah.
Your yes/no questions are great for just like quick checks or confirmations, like, are you coming to the party?
Right.
But even with a simple yes or no,
Yeah.
you can always expand your answer
Right.
to make it more engaging.
Exactly.
Now, your why questions,
Yeah.
those are your information gathering powerhouses.
Okay.
They dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
You got who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Yeah.
And depending on which one you choose,
Right.
it really impacts the type of information you get.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
It's not just about asking a why question.
Exactly.
It's about choosing the right word
Right.
to get the info you want
Precisely.
and why questions.
Oh, boy.
I bet you've got some stories.
I've got a few why questions gone wrong, I'm sure.
Oh, man. But before we go down that rabbit hole,
Yeah.
what about choice questions?
Ooh, choice questions.
These are interesting.
They're really helpful
Yeah.
for like decision making or narrowing things down.
Okay.
So instead of just like, what do you want to do this weekend?
Right. A very open-ended.
Way too open. It's
Yeah.
like, would you prefer to go hiking or catch a movie?
I see what you mean. It's like you're
Narrowing it down.
giving them a little bit of a starting point.
Exactly.
Instead of just this vast
Good.
open field of options.
It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we've got those tag questions,
Oh, the tag questions.
which the guide points out
Right.
can be really tricky
Yeah.
for non-native speakers.
They can be a little tricky. What makes them so challenging?
Well, it's interesting because, like, with a tag question,
Okay.
like, you're coming to the party, aren't you?
Yeah.
The meaning can change
Oh,
depending on how you say it.
interesting.
If your voice goes up at the end,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of shows uncertainty.
Oh.
But if your voice goes down,
Okay.
it could sound like expectation
Oh, wow.
or even pressure.
So it's like you said, it's not just the words, it's
The delivery,
the delivery, yeah.
the tone.
The tone.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in tag questions,
Right.
I think we need to shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about answering questions.
Answering.
Because it's a two-way street, right?
Absolutely.
You got to be able to ask good questions, but you also...
I gotta know how to answer them well.
Yeah, answer them well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a two-way street. You know,
Yeah.
you can ask great questions, but if you don't know how to answer them well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
I've had those moments where I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Mm.
Total brain fart.
Like completely blanked and I just like mumble something.
It happens to the best of us.
But the guide actually had some really good tips
Oh, yeah.
for answering questions.
Absolutely, like smoothly.
Yeah, effectively.
One of the things they talked about is just like starting with a positive and engaged tone.
Okay.
Even just simple phrases
Mm-hmm.
like, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Or, I'm glad you asked that.
Right. It shows that you're listening.
Exactly. It shows you're present and you're interested in the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. And I think it also kind of like acknowledges the thoughtfulness of the question.
Yes, absolutely.
Like you put some thought into that question and I respect that.
Exactly.
And speaking of respect, the guide really emphasizes going beyond just one-word answers.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, how do you do that?
Well, like if someone asks, where do you live?
Right.
Instead of just saying Los Angeles.
Right. It's just a very flat
Yeah.
Los Angeles.
You could say, I live in Los Angeles, which is known for its beautiful beaches and vibrant culture.
I see. So you're giving a little bit more.
A little more color. A
Yeah.
little more context.
Yeah. You're inviting them into your world a little bit.
Exactly.
But what about those times when you need like a minute to think?
Yeah.
Like you're asked a question and you're like,
You need a moment.
give me a second.
Yeah.
I used to think that was like a weakness.
Oh, no.
You know, like, oh, I'm not quick enough or smart enough to like,
I don't have the answer right away.
yeah.
Well, the guy calls these time-buying tactics,
Okay, I like that.
which is really what it is.
Yeah.
You know, instead of just that awkward silence,
Right.
just say, let me think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Or, that's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Let me see how to best put that into words.
I love that because it's not like you're avoiding the question.
No,
It's more like,
it's more like, I'm going to give you a thoughtful answer.
yeah, like, I want to give you the best answer, so
Exactly.
give me a sec.
Yeah, give me a second to formulate that.
Yeah. So we've talked about some tips, but we've got to talk about
What about mistakes?
the mistakes.
Because we all make them.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
When it comes to asking and answering questions,
For sure.
what are some of those common pitfalls we should try to avoid?
Well, the guide talks about a few things like word order,
Okay.
forgetting those auxiliary verbs.
Oh, those pesky auxiliary verbs.
They can be tricky.
They get me every time.
And sometimes, relying too much on direct translations from other languages.
Right, right.
But it's all part of the process,
It is.
Everybody makes mistakes.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
And speaking of progress,
Yes,
the guide had some tips
they did.
for sounding more fluent and natural
Mm-hmm.
when speaking English.
Yes.
One of them was using contractions.
Contractions.
Yeah.
Love a good contraction.
They make such a difference, I feel like.
They do. It makes you sound more natural.
Yes, less formal.
More conversational. Like instead of saying, I am going to the store.
I'm going to the store. It's so much easier.
Yeah.
And it just flows better.
And then another one was fillers,
Oh, fillers.
which I thought was interesting because
Yeah.
I always try to avoid them.
I know a lot of people do.
I feel like,
You feel like it makes you sound
yeah, less intelligent or something.
right.
But what the guide was saying is that they can actually,
They could actually sound more
more natural and relatable.
Yeah.
It's like a little pause.
Like a little breath.
Yeah, think of it like punctuation.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Like the commas and periods
Exactly.
in spoken English.
Yes.
And then another tip was mirroring.
Oh, mirroring.
And I thought this one was fascinating.
It's a good one.
So what is mirroring?
Well, it's basically reflecting the other person's language and energy
Okay.
to build rapport.
Interesting.
So, like, if someone says, I'm really into hiking these days.
You might respond with, oh, hiking sounds amazing. What trails have you explored recently?
So it's like you're kind of
Matching their energy and their enthusiasm.
creating a connection through that.
Exactly.
It's a little dance
With a little dance.
of conversation.
Yes.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into questions,
Yeah.
what's like the key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember? I feel like we've really like uncovered so much
Well, yeah.
about questions.
Yeah, it's amazing how much there is to learn about something so simple.
It really is. And it feels like they're this like powerful tool for understanding and connecting with people.
Absolutely. And the best part is
Yeah.
anyone can get better at asking and answering questions.
It's a skill.
It is.
Yeah, but you can learn.
Exactly. It's not like you're just
Born with it.
born with it. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, if you're getting ready for a big presentation or
Yeah.
just, chatting with a friend.
Or just want to have
Yeah.
better everyday conversations.
Yeah, exactly. You can use these techniques
You
to
can.
really make a difference.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, what really stands out is that it's not about being perfect.
No, not at all.
It's about
It's about progress.
progress. Yeah.
It's about, embracing those stumbles along the way.
Yeah. And learning from those mistakes.
Exactly. And realizing that every conversation is a chance to get better.
Absolutely. It's a journey.
Yeah.
It's not a destination.
I love that.
And it's not just about like sounding fancy or
Yeah.
being super eloquent.
It's about connection.
Yeah.
It's about curiosity and empathy.
Yeah. And really wanting to like connect with
Engage with the people around you.
the people around you.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it would be great for our listeners to think about a question
Okay.
that they wish people ask them more often.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. What's
Yeah.
that question and how would you answer it brilliantly?
I love that that's something for everyone to kind of ponder on their own.
Yeah. Take a moment. Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us
This is fun.
on this deep dive into questions.
Yes.
We've really, like I said, uncovered so much
We covered a lot of ground.
about their structure, their power, and how to use them to have
More meaningful conversations.
better conversations.
Absolutely.
So remember, everyone, great conversations, they start
yeah.
with a single question.
That's all it takes.
So go out there, ask those questions,
And be curious.
and watch those connections blossom.
Exactly.
Thanks again for listening.